Today I'm excited to be joined by Graham O'Connell from GM Web and Justin Barry from Design Managers Australia. First though, we'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. So I'm Cassandra from Acquia and I'll be moderating today's webinar. As usual, today's webinar is being recorded and we'll send a link out to all attendees with the link to the recording and the slides in the next couple of days. Justin and Graham will also be taking questions for about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of their presentation. So please submit any questions you may have in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and we'll get to them at the end. So now, if you don't know much about Acquia, I'll give you a really quick introduction to who we are and what we do. So Acquia is the open source digital experience company, and we provide the world's most ambitious brands with technology that allows them to embrace innovation and create customer moments that matter. At Acquia, we believe in the power of community and giving our customers the freedom to build tomorrow on their own terms. On that note, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. So I'm excited to be joined by Graham, who is the lead developer at GM Web, a boutique web development company specializing in multi-platform integrated solutions, and Justin Barry, who is the founder and principal at service design agency Design Managers Australia. So with that introduction done, I'd like to hand over the mic for Graham and Justin to begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Graham O'Connell, lead developer at GM Web, and I'm here with Justin Barry, principal for Design Managers Australia. The project that we're going to share with you today was completed for Audi Australia, who wanted to bring their apprenticeship training program in-house, and at the same time as they were doing that, digitise their apprentice management processes. Immediately we knew that this was going to be an exciting project and lots of challenges and lots of opportunities as well. So by tuning in this afternoon, we are hoping to share with you some of the great insights into how you can bring a project like this to life, and also to continue to evolve it as your clients' needs do. So in 2016, the vocational education and training sector and registered training organisations themselves were under a lot of scrutiny for some pretty dodgy practices going on in the industry. At this time, Audi were outsourcing their apprenticeship training to a third party, and being the innovative company that they are, the existing processes simply wouldn't do. They wouldn't be up to standard to bring in-house in a digital format. So they needed to be transformed into something that didn't already exist, so that we could meet Audi's standards of excellence. Some of the issues that led to this project even being a thing in the first place was that the commercial products out there in the market, they were too expensive, they weren't really capable of meeting all of Audi's needs, and a big component of this was that they weren't able to be white labelled or rebranded so that they looked and felt like an Audi product. From this point of view, I knew that there was going to be a great opportunity to do something that would go above and beyond Audi's standards of expectations. And that meant we could bring in a service design front end to the build, and that's where Design Managers Australia comes in.
Hi everyone, this is Justin from DMA. With Audi, what we realised straight away is that we're dealing with an organisation that demands and delivers excellence at all times. So from the start of this project, we knew that we had to be on the ball in order to deliver the opportunities that Graham had outlined. And this excellence really goes throughout the entire organisation. So our client for this piece of work is what's called in Audi after sales. And after sales is everything that happens at Audi Australia from the moment you pay for your car through to its delivery, and then the servicing that happens with the car after that. So everything beyond sales. For this piece of work, we were really literally confronted by Audi's excellence, because we were working out of their headquarters and centre of excellence, and it's the kind of place where you walk across the floor and people greet you. They're on brand, they're on message all of the time, they're expertly trained, and they really do live the brand. Lots of organisations talk about it, but at Audi they actually do it, and you just come face to face with that immediately. Also, we knew that we were part of a larger organisation, so as you can see on the slide, not only were we working for Audi Australia, but we had to fit within global Volkswagen ICT frameworks and standards. So this was a piece of work that at both a service design and at a delivery and digital delivery level had to fit within those stringent guidelines. And it's just a cool place. When you go to HQ, it's like being in a movie. You jump in a lift, every floor you come out, the doors open, and there are people just working on extraordinary machines. So it's actually really cool to work with a company like this as well. So what we decided to do for this project was really combine excellence in digital delivery with a service design front end. Service design, from DMA's perspective, means that we don't just design user interfaces and work to requirements, but go beyond that to really understand the users of the system and what the human need is in the system that we're developing. So we want to understand who all the players in the system are, not just those that even the client might name up front. And we also want to understand the business desire. And in this case, that was after sales business goals with response to being a registered training organisation, which had all kinds of government engagement and government legislative restrictions. But also the intent and technical feasibility that we're working with. And in this case, that was the use of Drupal and Acquia, which Graham will go into more detail about later. So on this project, by using service design, we were able to ask questions that even the client didn't think of straight away in terms of who would use this system. So we wanted to look at what the basic requirements were, which in this case was what the Australian Skills Quality Authority had minimum requirements so that apprentices could actually be accredited within this system. But we wanted to explore other challenges that Audi might be having around apprentice management. So we're talking about a group of users here who are dispersed across the country, 16, 17-year-olds coming into a highly functioning organisation, and also an organisation that's trying to tap into getting apprentices at a time when, particularly in mechanical engineering, interest is pretty low because of pay and other standards in the industry. And this system we saw as potentially helping with a whole range of things beyond just meeting the minimum requirements of the apprentice management system. So we were able to build in a whole bunch of research which helped us understand what those opportunities were.
There were three key components to this project in what we needed to deliver. The first piece was some best practice service design delivered by Design Managers Australia. This was more than just developing technical requirements. This led into a very high quality technical solution, including public-facing lead generation and then the training delivery portal as well. And then we follow all this up with, and during the process of build dedicated testing of the digital products based on the service design principles of iteration and prototyping, so that we know that the system is working and so that we know it's working early. I'm going to hand over to Justin now, who is going to take you through the first part of this, the service design.
So you can see from the bottom of this slide, the methodology we use for service design is very similar in words to other design methodologies that you would have come across. We clarify, we explore, we synthesize, and we define, which for us as designers is where we end up with a specification, and then build and deploy come in. What we tried to do with this piece of work was introduce some things beyond just interviewing or exploring at a desk-based level. So we went out and observed. One of our key user groups in this project were the dealerships that exist around the country. So it was really important that we got out and about and saw how people actually worked. And so all of you out there might be familiar with situations where a client might say something like, well, what if we just gave everyone an iPad? And that is a potential digital solution. But until you get out and in the field, see how people actually work, you can't respond to whether that is actually a device that would work in the setting that these guys work in. So that's why we spent a lot of time out with people. When we did that, we learned things that we could never have learned by just sitting at our desks and researching the apprenticeship management requirements. Things like the after-sales managers who exist in each dealership build up extraordinary relationships with their young apprentices. So we had after-sales managers who would drive around to pick up these kids to get them to come to work. They would go to local schools to tout for apprentices. They built strong relationships in the community, all of which a digital system might support but couldn't if we didn't know that from doing that research. So we do that observation, we do in-depth interviews to understand everything that's going on, we observe the system in use, and that gives us a really strong current state analysis. But then to move to our solutioning, we do a lot of prototyping. And so in this case, we built a whole series of paper prototypes about what the system could look like and what its features would be based on the research, so that after sales managers, the trainers, the mentors, a whole range of the roles that emerged during our research phase could have a play with a cheap, quick to develop, quick to rip up, quick to redo system at a paper prototype level. One of the things that we're really conscious of at DMA is designing to make, not just to think. So for this project, that meant that we had to hand something to Graham that meant he could just immediately take on board the kind of things that we were finding. There's two ways we did that. One, to ensure that the specification we developed was usable, but also we involved GM Web in the research phase. So all of the things that I've just spoken about, where we were observing, prototyping, we made sure that information was relayed to the developers, because there's nothing worse than upfront design taking place, and if you're a developer, you're not really understanding the context for what you're hearing. And GM Web were actively part of the prototyping workshops as well, so they could see people's responses. You can see on this slide some of the areas that we're talking about. So on the top right were the paper prototypes that we took people through, multiple devices. You can see that computer in the top right is not a live computer. It actually has a series of paper sheets on it, so people could sit and an after sales manager could push buttons on the screen and we could watch their behaviour and see where they wanted to move to next. The top left is the kind of detailed data that we were working with. So this organisation runs off knowing what its volumes for apprentices that it has to hire, how many bays it needs for servicing, all kinds of extraordinary things a number of years in advance based on its sales that it's making now. And so this system had to be able to cope with that. And then just some vision at the bottom of where we were observing people doing their work. So what was delivered? So the service design front end really ends up delivering to the developers both statements about the current state from the research process, but also the future state visualization. And one of the things that really jumped out at us was that just digitising existing paper forms was not going to work with this system, because the paper-based apprenticeship management system is pretty convoluted. And it wouldn't have given the client what they wanted. So we had to come up with some real out there future state visualizations and mock-ups, so that when GM Web worked with the client to deliver, they had a really good principle base and a really good vision of what might happen in the future. The type of artifacts that we developed that help guide the build, you can see along the bottom, we describe and deliver to the developers user stories and user journeys, which make the roles and what people are trying to achieve out of the system clear, so that when a developer is making a decision down the track, they have this foundational evidence about what people actually wanted from the system. On the left-hand side, you can see the kind of mock-ups that we would do, and to be really clear, what we don't do in our design process is UI mock-ups. That evolved through the build. But these mock-ups are to show the features and benefits that the users expect when the developers jump in. And we have some examples in here of what a dashboard might look like that was in our specification. Again, not to determine that there should be 6 squares on a screen, but to say, as a minimum, if there's a dashboard developed, it must meet these requirements in terms of features that people are expecting to use. And of course, we did that across multiple devices because it had to be ready to be used in a range of environments. So challenges and insights for this project. The first challenge was that we were really working with a large dispersed user group. So you can imagine that there's dealerships, Audi dealerships from Perth right across to the East Coast, and even within large metropolitan places like Sydney, there are differences between the dealerships if you're in Parramatta or if you're in the CBD, and not differences at a brand level. All of these places, if you walk into one of these Audi shops, look like the other. They're extraordinary in that way, but differences in things like real estate, access to space, the kind of access to apprentices that they might have. So we were dealing with a group that we had to build a system that was amenable to what their actual business operating environments were like. there was attraction to the system. We had to make this thing really sing to the users, and we're talking here about a government regulatory driven apprenticeship management system at its core. So that was a challenge in its own right, making sure that that was attractive. And we think we did that by thinking about lead generation and things like that and linking it to existing Audi collateral. It had to evolve in the needs of the system administrators. So after sales managers out in the field and apprentices are fine, but this thing is driven also by our clients who are the central administrative team. And this was the first time that they brought their training back in-house. So they didn't actually know where that might lead to. So not only did we have to come up with a solution, but it had to be developed in a principle-based way so that GM Web over time can be responsive to how their administration of the system changes. But at the core, a real challenge was that it had to meet the government auditing requirements. And for us, moving into a digital environment, that was tough because we were digitising many processes that the government actually hadn't digitised yet. And so that led to its own tension, but we think we resolved it really well.
From a build perspective, the way that we delivered, of course, was starting with some open source software in Drupal. And in Drupal, you get things called distributions, which are essentially prepackaged features and modules that give you a solution to a particular problem. In this case, there was already a learning management system, or LMS, that you could download and install. And this is where we started the basis for the Audi apprenticeship management system. So what this allowed us to do was just have a huge leap forward in terms of having connections between apprentices, teachers, attendance marking, evidence uploading and assessment results and all of that sort of thing. But the LMS was very focused just on education and classes. So this was one of the limitations that we would have to get through, and was the start to the customization that would follow, which was to expand this to meet Audi's expectations of the system, which would mean managing apprentices from the very first time that they interact with the brand through to enrolling in the program, submitting all their assessments and graduating, earning their nationally recognised qualification, and then their ongoing career with Audi after that. And one of these things is Audi offers an optional year at the end of your apprenticeship so that you can become a master technician. And this is just something that the system had to be capable of managing. To be able to deal with all this customization, you need to have a platform that will be able to handle it. And for me as a developer, this was a key consideration for when we were looking at using Acquia. So essentially, I don't want to have to deal with all of the DevOps and system administration sort of tasks. So it's really good to know that Acquia has this robust backend where I can build a feature on my local machine, go through all of my testing of the code, and then upload it with a click of a button, call Audi, say, hey, check this out, the new feature's ready. They test it in this staging environment. That's an exact replica of production. And when they say that it's ready to go, I literally drag and drop, and a few minutes later, the feature's live in production, and we're already thinking about the next thing. There's no downtime, there's no interruptions to Audi's work. The third key piece for how we delivered the technical solution was 100% users first. And I know that everyone says users first a lot, but it's important to understand what that means for each individual project, because in this case, the system also had to meet government regulations. If it didn't, then we wouldn't be presenting here today. So what this meant in terms of processes was we would go to Audi and we'd talk to the person who needed the new feature or upgrade, whether it was a service manager or program administrator. We'd sit down with them and talk through what they needed to happen, what their current business process was, and then fully spec out the feature so that we could support that process and make it more efficient while still achieving the outcome that that user needed. Once we've got that full specification, we would go back and behind the scenes, we would map that to what needs to be produced when Audi would get to audit time, which happens a lot, or if they needed to prepare some end-of-year reporting on apprentice progress and that sort of thing. The final piece for how we delivered was having the service design front end which produces the service design principles and their intent. So they're critical for all new features and enhancements. And for this project, there were 5 principles. These were to support self-management within the system, regardless of what the user's role was, to be premium so that the system was in line with the Audi brand, to be apprentice-driven, to save time, and to use data so that everything in the system is in real time. So by adhering to these principles when we're developing new features, you're ensuring that the system will perform overall. And then there's another key advantage to this when you've got a lot of evolving client needs, and that's that the service design principles allow you to identify the opportunities and what that will actually mean for your client. So you can justify all of the business decisions around new features and enhancements by relating them back to, this is going to take us X hours to build, it's going to save you Y hours in administration time. So then their business decision becomes a no-brainer. In terms of challenges and opportunities that we had while we were building, the very first one came very early on in the project, and this was related to Audi being a subsidiary company for Volkswagen. This meant that we weren't just building an IT system that had to fit into Audi's standards of infrastructure and security, but it had to adhere to this global privacy and security policies of Volkswagen. And this was very evident when the CIO of Volkswagen walks into your meeting and starts asking you some pretty tough technical questions. But when it came to implementing the actual hosting environment, it was a breeze with the Acquia platform as well, because we can just set these requirements up from the beginning before we've even started doing development work. The second key challenge that we had was around the look and feel of the system. There is, of course, a public-facing information site where we're tracking your apprentices, and it would be expected that this would adhere to the Audi corporate identity. But the bulk of the project was an internal system that the public would never see, and that didn't mean that it didn't need to adhere to the corporate identity as well. This was validated throughout all of the testing, where a lot of the users came back saying that it looked and felt like an Audi product. So that was a win for the team as well. The third challenge was around Audi implementing the system while they were learning a whole lot of new processes and how to become a registered training organisation themselves. So there were a lot of changing processes and a lot of learning from a business point of view going on at the same time as development. The one example that I've got for this today was around evidence management. So in the research phase, we were talking to trainers, and they said that they would do the assessments with their apprentices during the week, and they would get to the end of the week and upload the evidence from those assessments to their apprentice profiles. But then come late January, the system's implemented and the first week of classes finishes up. The trainers get all the evidence into a big pile and just dump it on the program administrator's desk. So then the program admin had to deal with it. And this process still exists where the program administrator handles the uploading of evidence. But we've obviously gone through some changes around the evidence management so that it's become nicer for the program admin. Over the course of the last 18 months that this has been running now, there's been a number of different staff move in and out of the program admin role as well. So that's made some more efficiencies and some new ideas have come in along the way. Now what happens is the program admin gets their files in a nice way at the end of the training week, and then it's a 5-minute click of a button to upload all of their evidence, which then maps out to all the apprentice profiles, units of competency, their grades. And we've taken this process that was a whole bunch of hard copy pieces of paper in a box, and it's now 5 minutes until it's real time and all apprentices can see their achievements at the end of a training week. The final challenge that we had was around audits and regulatory limitations. There's one document in an apprenticeship which is the official record for their progress, and that's called their training plan. Essentially, it needs signatures from head office, from their trainers and from their service managers out in the dealership. to say, yes, this apprentice has proven that they can do this work. Up until the start of this project, this all needed to be hard copy, and it also needs to be updated every 3 months. So every quarter, there's this whole big process of sending the document for each apprentice out to the dealership signing off their new competencies, send it back to head office, scan it in and upload it. So it's a really big pain in the neck. The way that we approached that was to go and talk to the training authorities in each of the different states, as it's not consistent around the country. And after a fairly reasonable amount of back and forth, the government came back and said, yes, we can actually improve this system so that it would meet Audi standards. And it's really great and positive to see that efficiencies and great outcomes can happen by talking through your business requirements with government authorities and other relevant parties.
I think we have been on this project now for a period of time, and when we're describing it to people, we underestimate the complexity of what we're dealing with here. And the story that Graham just told, our DMA specialisation for the last 17 years has been designing government systems and public services. And to hear that a digital system that was developed for a private company then led to a number of training authorities to rethink their approach to digital proof and to accepting accredited proof is just a huge deal. So we get used to telling the story, but I think we forget just what a big issue this is, where actually a well-designed digital system enabled government to say, yeah, we're comfortable with changing our rules on that to accept what you've done. And that was one of the goals that Audi gave us at the start of the project. They said that they didn't want to just digitise the existing system, they wanted to build something that was outstanding and innovative. So it's great proof of that. We also sometimes underestimate the complexity of the interacting systems that we were working with. So when you hear Graham talk about the training week, to have a training week means Audi fly in or drive in or bus in apprentices from all over the country, first year, second year and third year, to a training facility in Sydney, which means this system also interacts and engages with travel booking systems, with the processes, manual and automatic, and digitised, that Audi use. And so we're not just talking about making sure that their evidence is uploaded. We're talking about doing things like reminding 16-year-olds that if they don't remember their boots, they can't do training. And this digitised system really allows Audi to have a whole of life relationship with these apprentices. It also means that when the apprentices go back after their training to the dealership where they work, that's where their mentors also have to meet a whole range of requirements for the training authorities, because they do their training class in Sydney, but then they have to prove that they can do it on the job. And this system makes sure that those mentors in the distributed dealerships also have an integrated view of what's going on with those apprentices. So it's been really outstanding in terms of those results. But the results that matter for a company like Audi, the ones that are on your screen now, we've really seen some brand enhancements through this solution, and that's led to the attraction of quality apprentices. And as we were saying at the start of this project, Audi made it really clear that it was quite difficult to attract, and they were talking about using social media and campaigns. And one of the things that our research showed us was that it would be very hard to only reach new apprentices through social media campaigns, that they actually needed a system that was real to them and would help attract. So things like automating initial tests, ensuring that they could meet literacy standards, and also things like being able to put in a postcode that would then direct them to a dealership that was close to them, really helped make this system go beyond just a marketing campaign. And that really led to the creation of an end-to-end experience for the apprentices, but also those after-sales teams. And in terms of the numbers, we're talking, these are some numbers that we put together before the Acquia Engage conference. They've probably gone up since then, but over 2,000 admin hours saved per year with our clients in headquarters. Most importantly for us, because of the relationship we built up with the after-sales managers as key users, the implementation of this system has led to well over 400 hours of dealership hours saved per year. Why that's critical is that for those dealerships, because they run of knowing every car that has to be booked in for years in advance. Every second is money, and they can't afford to have a digital system slow them down. So we needed to make sure there was cut through there. And really pleasing number for us is that we're up over 3,000 potential apprentices reached now, which gives Audi that lead in to then be able to start looking at who the quality applicants are in amongst all of the applicants, which is a real breakthrough for them. How we delivered this was to really concentrate on having a small responsive team. It's really important that in the kind of steps we've taken you through that the client didn't get bogged down in us being unwieldy, and so we needed to move rapidly because they had a deadline of having to implement their RTO status by a certain date, and if they didn't meet that, they couldn't run their classes. So we had to be small and responsive. We made sure that research equaled evidence, which equaled insight, and as Graham went through those service design principles, at every step through the research and service design phase and then into the build, we made sure that our Audi collaborators, that the team were aware of what was emerging, which meant they weren't surprised by a presentation at the end of the project. They were involved in the workshops, they knew what was going on, and they could see the insights forming themselves. And rapid delivery, we were really careful and critical to make sure that we got this to them in the time we promised, so that it didn't become some large transformation project that wasn't delivered.
So some of the reasons why this project worked was you obviously need to have the right skills to pull a project like this off. But while we were extremely confident, I guess, in that regard, you also need to have the right platform to be able to execute. The following thing on from that is with our small team, you also need to get your client on board with the fact that just because you have lots and lots of people moving through this program, which is hundreds of people a year now, it doesn't mean that you need to spend thousands and thousands of hours and have hundreds of people working on it in the first place. So by having this small team, it allows you to design what needs to be built and then deliver it in an agile and responsive way to your clients' changing needs, which, as we've mentioned, there were a lot of changing needs as a lot of learning was going on throughout this project. So thanks, Cass. That's the story that we've come to share today, and we're happy to open it up to any questions now.
Thanks, guys, for that great presentation. If anyone else would like to post any questions, please do so in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your user interface. We have had a couple of questions come through, so I'll get started into them. So we have one for Justin from Jean. Question is, why is prototyping so important to the service design process?
It's really, look, for us, prototyping is the bread and butter of getting to solutions quickly, but it's really important for clients because you don't have to invest a lot to do paper prototyping. It also means that we can test and validate what we've heard in the field. So we know from the kind of research that we do and have done for years that people will tell you sometimes what they think you want to hear. So prototyping allows us to then test and validate what we've heard with actually what the system might look like. And then we get very genuine responses from people who say, no, I don't want it to do that. It has to do this. And so it's both investment positive for the client because it's quick and we can change things quickly, but it also helps us validate the findings that we've had from the research phase.
We have another question here saying, what's the name of the LMS distribution you built your customizations on top of?
So we just started with a pig note, which, as I understand, is the most popular LMS that Drupal offers out there. And there's a number of large organisations already using it. And that's what we started with. And it's focused more around like tertiary sort of education and traditional classroom-based learning rather than apprenticeship. So that's where we started doing a lot of the customization for what Audi really needed to get out of it.
And a question here for Graham. You mentioned that Acquia was a key component in the delivery of the system by handling system administration tasks. Are those benefits applicable to larger organisations and government departments as well?
Yep, definitely. So if large organisations don't want to become sort of bloated within the tech team, then they need to be thinking smaller teams and smarter systems. So through platforms like Acquia, you can really start to cut out a lot of the roles that might appear on a traditional organisation chart. But then also in the Acquia regard, when you've got a much larger system and you're talking about tens of thousands of people working through it, then it's incredibly scalable and incredibly easy to manage as well.
A question here from Jeremy. How does Apingo compare with other popular LMS like Moodle and Blackboard?
Well, to be honest, that research was done a few years ago now. Essentially, you need to pick what's right for you and what skill sets you have available, I guess. So in terms of what customizations and what comes out of the box you need, like Moodle is perfect for a lot of people, as you would know, because it's a very popular LMS. And then in this case, what we wanted to start with was Apingo because that's what gave us the groundwork and infrastructure that we needed to build on.
Follow up as well from Jeremy. He said, do you build in other LMS or just Apingo?
For this project, it's mainly
in general,
built.
I believe.
Sorry?
In general, so not just this project.
We work with a lot of different systems actually. So yeah, it's not just limited to Apingo, no.
And we have another question here. Just wondering how you guys manage the adoption of users to the digital change brought about by the new system. I understand that Graham is from the developer technical team. How did they contribute, or how did they work with the organizational change management team in terms of user adoption?
I'll start that answer and then Graham can finish it. From our design perspective, because the research that we provide to the client not only looks at the requirements of the system, but the users and their journey that they're trying to partake in. Our clients at Audi were immediately thinking about all the things that they needed to have in place from a human change management point of view. So very early we were able to make it clear that this wasn't just about being able to change people over to this system through marketing, that they had to build it in with the key users out in the dealerships. So that's what the design process enables, and the change management and the ongoing collaboration with GM Web and Audi was then, the design was a platform for them being a team then and even now to ensure that that change continues to occur. But this was a new system, so this is something that we had the luxury, if you like. It's not really a luxury when you're trying to implement something new, but this was Audi bringing their training back in-house and really having that impetus of the organisation behind it to move people and onboard them.
Yeah, so also at the end of each sort of release that we do, where there's a number of features to communicate back out to dealerships, there's regular meetings that occur within Audi. So through the after sales team, we work with them to put together the list of the new features and user guides around how to use those new features. And that information then gets communicated out through bulletins and that sort of thing as well. So there's, the communication goes the whole way through. It doesn't just turn up and then someone logs in and tries to work something out for themselves.
Cool. And we have another question here for Justin. How did you ensure there was continuity between service design front end and the development phase?
So we are obsessed with what we call, and I know people use it as a catchphrase, but we build it into all of our projects, a multidisciplinary team. So even though we were doing a service design and research front end, we just considered ourselves part of GM Web's development team from the front. So whenever we went out into the field, the interview guides, the structure of our research, we would work with GM Web and with the client to ensure everyone knew that that was coming from the right intent. We downloaded immediately after observing and being out in the field because we wanted GM Web and the developers to really understand what we were seeing out there from a human perspective. So immediate download. And then if we do our job properly, the other one is actually involving the developers in the prototyping sessions. There's absolutely nothing like, we really dislike how developers are often put in a box of, well, they can just build to requirements. You have to, from our perspective, have developers who've seen actual people engaging and talking about what they're trying to achieve, because code and development is not just one-dimensional. It has to take context into account. And so we made sure that GM Web were in the room with us when we moved through those prototypes. And just if we've done our job properly, the specification that we develop should live well beyond the life of the project, because it contains a whole range of IP that developers can then go back and refer to when they have questions about why they might be doing something.
Another question here about the timeline you guys had to complete this project in.
The initial release was about 5 months, I think. So we started talking about the nuts and bolts of it back in July, and then it had to be ready by January the following year. So it was about 5 months from the initial research phase right through to the very first release.
And that's why we talk about the bravery of Audi, because Graham and GM Web immediately said to the client, we know that you think we're going to just start gathering requirements and doing an IT build, a digital build, but we want you to trust us to do this service design front end, which in its own was 6 to 8 weeks of work. So to say to a client, you want a digital system, but we're not going to start developing and building the digital component for 6 to 8 weeks, was really brave on their part to say, okay, let's see how it goes. But we knew that they'd get great results from it. But that timeline of 5 months that Graham talks about was crunched considerably by the service design front end, though we would argue it helps speed up development.
Yeah, it definitely helps speed up development.
Okay. And now that the system has been delivered, what's the future of the platform?
Well, we continue to work on a wish list with Audi each year, and we review it a number of times throughout the year, but we release new features pretty much every week now and continue to integrate with more of the back-end systems at head office. But as that's been the focus for the last 18 months or so, we're now starting to focus more on feedback and enhancements from outside of head office. So, for example, dealerships have come back to head office around the potential apprentice management and how that whole piece of the system can work a little bit better for them, a bit more efficient. So we're now starting to implement that as well, ready for when recruitment opens later on in the year.
And we have another question. How did you account for built-in longevity and sustainability in the learning content, i.e. what processes did you build into the system to keep the content up to date?
Well, essentially there's two parts to that, I guess. So Audi, of course, have all of their quality management system, which manages all of their templates and forms and ensures that they're up to date for when they get audited. And then we essentially use those as templates within the system so that we can automate those processes for them as much as possible. But I'm not going to go into the nuts and bolts, I guess, of how we actually do that, because that's a critical part for the whole system.
Cool. Looks like we're out of questions. Any outstanding ones we'll follow up with you after the webinar. Well, thanks again, guys, for attending today, and thank you, Graham and Justin, for your wonderful presentation today. And please keep an eye out for the recording and the slides. We'll share a link with you guys in the next couple of days. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks. See ya.